when it comes to health, today diet-related disease is the #1 cause of death globally. So it's accounting for about 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. Whether it's the freshwater use of 70% of global fresh water used for agriculture, or the fact that we contribute nearly 1/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions, the sustainability of this sector of our food systems is really to be questioned. And then when we look at equity, there, the people most likely to experience hunger or malnutrition or diet-related diseases are often those who are historically marginalized based on their identities. COVID is only exacerbating these 3 dimensions of the challenge with our food systems today. We're seeing that people with diet-related disease are significantly more susceptible to severe illness and death. The empty store shelves as pictures of the long lines for access to the food banks that marked not just the beginning of the pandemic, but are protracting through it, really reveals how vulnerable our food systems are to shocks. They are anything but resilient. And then hunger is rising as a result of the economic disruptions in marginalized populations, almost 140 million people now today. So we believe at the Rockefeller Foundation that we can rebuild our food systems. We can make them such that they protect and improve human health, they sustain and regenerate the environment, and they build a more equitable future. As the Rockefeller Foundation, we have been at this. We have been at the work of supporting and promoting food and agricultural transformation for over a century. And we've learned from an imperfect past that too narrow focus on a hunger crisis and on productivity, which is really what we had when we came out the Green Revolution, has long negative and unintended consequences. And so we have learned from this past, and learning from that history, we have chosen to renew our focus really on 3 dimensions of the food systems we want to steward into the world. We want food systems that are nourishing, regenerative, and equitable. And we know we can do this. We can do better going forward. So the way our strategy at the foundation is shaped, we're taking very intentionally a whole of systems approach. So this is not about piecemeal solutions and kind of scattershot approaches. It is about a systems approach to dramatically improve and equitably improve diet quality, both such that it nourishes the people and the planet. And our sort of arsenal, our weapons to take this on are really about innovation. We're looking to catalyze and scale innovations with really large transformational potential. Among our top priorities, which are several, decarbonizing food supply chains has really become a central dimension of our strategy. And that's because we're committed to helping commit to a green and equitable post-COVID recovery. I just want to double click on diet quality so that it's very clear what we mean here. For diet quality to be a central aspect, we're talking about diet that provides not only adequate calories and nutrients, but it comes from diverse intake of different food groups, and with the next layer, that is produced in a way that is regenerative for the environment. So we're not just talking energy sufficiency or even nutrient adequacy. We're talking about a healthy diet that includes food from several food groups and has greater diversity within food groups. So last slide to leave you with, pulling it all together, our strategy really has these 3 dimensions: strengthening and greening supply networks, leveraging the power of procurement, and transforming food systems policies. On that procurement piece here, this is really about shifting the purchasing of key institutions. So think public schools and other agencies. What we want to do is unlock the supply and the demand of protective diets. So fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains. And then this 3rd dimension around transforming food systems policies. This work is everything from building coalitions, generating data. It's also about enabling and supporting initiatives like the United Nations Food Systems Summit. And all of this in the spirit of trying to change the incentives and the enabling environment that really allow these major shifts to occur for food systems improvement in the years to come. So I'll leave it there. I think I shortcut myself at the top to say, I'm Sarah Farley, and I work for the Rockefeller Foundation. I hope that became apparent there, but just so excited to engage in this conversation with our other fantastic panelists. So with that, I'm going to invite Ruth to give her opening remarks and present the Global Alliance for us.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah, and really pleased to be part of this conversation. Again, I'm Ruth Richardson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I've been with the Global Alliance since its inception in 2012. As Sarah mentioned, the Global Alliance is a strategic alliance of philanthropic foundations working together and with others to transform food systems. We're almost 10 years old, and we're home to almost 30 foundation members. Our members are very diverse and come from a number of different entry points. Some predominantly fund climate change, others focus on public health, others on farmers' rights and protections, others on biodiversity and conservation, and the list goes on. They're also very diverse in terms of size and scope, scale, cultures, etc. But what brings our members together is really the centrality of food systems to all the critical issues that we're facing today, whether it's climate change, COVID, increasing rates of hunger, and other things that Sarah has also touched on. There are sort of three things I would like to underscore about the Global Alliance by way of introduction, and then hopefully I can get into more detail as we get through some of the questions in the conversation. But the three things I'd really just like to underscore is, first of all, that we're a strategic alliance with an underscore on strategic. We have a really strong emphasis on advocacy and communications. And in this way, we share a passion and a commitment to challenging the status quo and advocating for positive alternatives. We believe strongly that we are more than the sum of our parts, especially as we unify and amplify our voice on the global scale, at a sort of scale and scope that we might not otherwise achieve as individual foundations. The second thing I really want to present is that we are fundamentally principles driven. And by that I mean that we're guided by a set of 7 principles. And these 7 principles are renewability, resilience, equity, diversity, health, inclusion, and interconnectedness. These principles are what others might call overarching goals. There are lots of ways to frame these. We call them principles. But these principles guide our vision, and they provide a diagnostic tool that we refer to each and every day. Our principles are an incredibly powerful way to kind of work together in alliance, and I can't underscore enough how important they are to the Global Alliance and to our membership. The final thing I just want to pass along to you is that our current efforts are focused on 7 calls to action, which have surfaced through deeply collaborative work over the last 9 years. We believe that food system transformation will only come about through deep collaboration with policymakers, the private sector, Indigenous peoples, farmers' organizations, social movement leaders, and so on. And in working with a wide range of diverse stakeholders and food system actors, we've identified sort of 7, as we see them, non-negotiables for food system transformation, which I can elaborate on later in the conversation. But suffice it to say here that we believe these are the imperatives for the global community as we head into critical processes in 2021, such as the UN Food Systems Summit, the Climate COP, the Biodiversity COP, Nutrition for Growth, and other important global fora. Let me just finally say that while we're very much globally focused and Global Alliance works at a global level for systems change, we very much see this in partnership with our foundation members who very much work at the local, regional, and national levels. So without having the graphic in front of me, we sort of see it as an infinity loop where what we're doing informs our members, what our members do inform us. And so therefore we can work at all scales at the same time and truly try to get to sort of systems change from a systems perspective. So let me leave it there, Sarah, and happy to articulate and further elaborate on any of those points as we get into the discussion.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Ruth. Julie, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to share my screen here. And first apologize because we were hoping that Dr. Sally Rocky could actually be here with you today. And unfortunately, she had a last-minute challenge, and you get me. Sally is the founding executive director of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and she has been a dynamic, innovative force in forming the organization. So FAR was founded in 2014 when we were given $200 million from the Farm Bill. And we were set up in a unique model that relied on partnerships between the public sector and the private sector to bring together funding in an innovative way to fund great science. So our vision, of course, is that not just here in the US, but internationally, we will provide access, nutrition, and my personal goal is to do it on thriving farms, but not just thriving farms per se, farms where we're viewing the farmers as heroes, because the farmers just have a really difficult time in terms of everything that they have to focus on. And so, I think we're better at recognizing grocery workers who are out there in COVID times, but we also need to recognize how important the agriculture sector is to the food system. So how we work, in addition to the original 200 million we were given 185 in the 2018 Farm Bill. So 385 million from public sources, and then we match that with funding from private sources before we can use a penny of it. So we have this unique private-public partnership model that is working extremely well. And I'll explain what that means here in a second. Our paradigm is such that we want these research partnerships to really have an impact. And the research partnerships can be anything from the agriculture sector to the consumer packaged goods sector, or it could be just at the retail level or just at the basic research level. So it's got a wide range and it's got a lot of dimension to it. We work quickly. We can get a grant out in a week. We do this in the emergency space quite often. And then we leverage, but we really focus on research gaps. The funding that we have is not very much, and so we like to find those novel pieces of research that are really going to connect dots and make a difference. We have challenge areas is how we structure our research. We have soil, health, and water, all the way to food and nutrition, and all the plants and animals in between. So it's quite a broad mandate, and we have innovative projects in each of those areas. So over the really 4 to 5 years we've been active, you can see the 213 grants and the 272 million. But what we're most proud of is that we have garnered almost 50% more in matching funds than in the funds provided by the government. And that means that we're really leveraging the government's money quite effectively in making sure that research in the food and ag area is increased. These are our partners, and there are actually over 400 of them, not on this slide, but in general. And we find that over 90% of our projects have more than one funding partner, and we have 70% of our projects that have funding partners that are comprised of multiple sectors. So it's a very collaborative effort, each of our projects is, and we really appreciate everyone who's in there with us. We do invest in the scientific workforce in various ways by providing fellowships and research grants and prizes. And here's how we typically make our awards. One of the most innovative pieces here is the consortia, where we bring together, in the Crops of the Future example, which was our first consortium, bringing together 14 different partners to work on leafy greens, to work on improving the protein content in plants, and to work on wheat drought tolerance, among other many other dimensions of research in the crop space. So at that point, I will leave it back to Sarah, and we'll progress to the next section.
Terrific. Thank you, Julie, so much. So where I'd like to begin is just a warm-up question. We'll keep it energetic here. So 5 words. In 5 words, how would you each describe the food system of today? Maybe let's start with you, Ruth.
I'll do it in 4.
Ooh.
Not fit for purpose.
Not fit for purpose. Can't disagree with you there. Julie, what about you?
I'm going with many of the concepts that you touched on, Sarah. Complex, vulnerable, COVID impacted, cost efficient, and undervalued.
Let's unpack it further. I'm inspired by both of these. So Ruth, how would you walk us through this? What really is this relationship between our current global food system, food nutrition insecurity, land degradation, climate change, and equity? In other words, how does your organization, how does the Strategic Alliance of GAF really frame the challenges of today's food system? And then, Julie, I want to hear the same from you.
Great. Well, I think as we've already started to touch on, we know that food systems sit at the nexus of all the big challenges we face today. COVID-19, extreme weather events related to climate change, increasing poverty, even peace and conflict. Indeed, COVID-19 has given us a stark reminder of the deep interconnections that exist between human, animal, and planetary health. And it's really a wake-up call to just how much our food systems are locked into cycles that produced poor health for people and the planet alike. To go back to my forward answer with the food system not being fit for purpose, we know that the way we produce, process, consume, distribute, waste, etc., food, results in significant negative impacts. So Sarah, you touched on some of these earlier. For example, the predominant industrial food system is too dependent on fossil fuels and on non-renewable inputs that result in pollution, environmental damage, and increasing greenhouse gas emissions. It promotes an economic system that results in liabilities due to hidden costs, global trade vulnerabilities, declining rural economies, and increased inequality. On the health side, it's at the root of skyrocketing rates of food-related disease like obesity, diabetes, malnutrition, and hunger. And even on the social side, it's been increasingly linked to the erosion of social cohesion and important social, cultural, and spiritual traditions. So these are some of the negative impacts of the food system. But as you alluded to, it's about what we're trying to get out of it. What are our goals and objectives of a food system? Because depending on what your goals are, that's how you're going to build your system. So unfortunately, we focused on the wrong things. I think, as you say, we can rebuild these food systems to focus on the right things. So that food systems are both the source of the problem, but they can actually be a really brilliant solution to the problems. So through a project of ours called Beacons of Hope, we've been working to amplify stories of initiatives that are addressing food system challenges in creative and inclusive ways. And time and again, we're blown away by how these initiatives put food at the center of their work, unlocking unknown potential and creating a ripple effect of positive and progressive change. Let me just give you one really quick example. Gastromotiva, a Brazilian not-for-profit organization, launched a series of solidarity kitchens where its students and alumni transform their home kitchens into small restaurants that serve those in need of a meal. And in doing so, they build community connections while also addressing food insecurity. So just one small example of how we can really find the solution space within food systems.
So interesting. The solidarity kitchens. I love that idea. Julie, let's hear from you. How would you frame the challenges of today's food system as you characterize them and observe them from the perspective of FAR?
Right. As you were referencing, Sarah, earlier, the food systems haven't really changed in many years. From the Green Revolution in the 50s and 60s, we learned how to manage and breed and put chemicals on, frankly, many farms that created additional problems. Also, given that we were in a time where food was not as plentiful as we needed, it worked beautifully to feed large swaths of populations. And we're moving toward another situation where in 2050 we cannot feed the planet. So we have to get more innovative, and we have to get more thoughtful about how we're moving this conversation forward. And in order to do that, FAR has a couple different initiatives. One is our Agriculture Climate Partnership, soon to be renamed Ag Mission, where we're working with multiple partners in order to gather the baseline of research that's necessary to feed this effort, and then to take this research, identify the research gaps and the roadmap for moving this forward into a large data collection effort that will then feed what we're calling the Climate Activation Platform. And this platform is going to be for farmers so that they can pull off customized solutions for how they can do climate smart agriculture in a precise way, tailored to their farms. So that's one major initiative that we have that is still forming and will be launching here shortly, much more officially than it has to date. The other piece is the Health Agriculture Nexus, and it's one of our challenge areas, but it's also an area where people need to open up their thinking of what food means in today's rubric. It means we don't know much about how nutrition flows from soil, from water, from sunlight to more or less nutritious food. And so we're forming several new projects in this challenge area that I'll talk about in a bit.
Perfect, perfect. I want to hear more about those ideas when we unpack solutions, Julie. Let's talk a little bit about what the horizon or over the horizon looks like to both of you. You know, I think as philanthropies, we feel we're in the fight for a better food future, but the attributes, the characteristics of that food future vary depending upon who you are, where you are, and what the challenges are that you're confronting. And I'll say, just to editorialize this a bit from the Rockefeller perspective, some of you may have followed this initiative we called the Food System Vision Prize. This was our effort to put out the megaphone to the global community and say, what is your food system vision for 2050? How is it resilient? How is it nourishing? How is it equitable? And how is it different for Lima, Peru versus the whole of Kenya or the Netherlands? We got 4,000 organizations in 1,300 teams from 119 countries putting forward their visions. And we worked with some data scientists quite recently to synthesize and extract the key data points that came through that bounty of research, essentially, that was put forward through the prize. And so I want to share what we gleaned in terms of what the future looks like, consolidated across 4,000 voices. And it really comes down to 5 ideas. Food as community, food as the new economy, food is reconciliation, food is medicine, and food is resilience. So 2050, as Ruth, you were speaking to the idea that food, it's not just about addressing the problems of food, it's about investing and transforming food systems so that the very structure and opportunity of food systems is itself a solution to challenges like carbon sequestration. So I'm sure you'll be elaborating on that. But we were just blown away by this picture of the multiple dimensions for a positive future of food systems put forward by the visionaries. I'll drop the link in during the Q&A if folks want to check that out. But Ruth, over turn to you. Tell us a little bit about how you're characterizing the future worth fighting for.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And it's very much in line with what you just talked about, because we've also gone through collaborative processes to identify what are the sort of the guiding principles for the kind of future of food that we want. And as I mentioned earlier, so the outcomes of that work was really the development of 7 sort of shared principles at the Global Alliance. And again, those principles, very much in line with what you were saying, include renewability, resilience, equity, diversity, health, inclusion, and interconnectedness. And again, these principles both shape our future of food, kind of the vision, as well as express our values and articulate the kind of change that we want to make. So the defining characteristics of the future of food is that they adhere to these characteristics. Now that's pretty high level, so let me bring it down to some specifics that actually connect our principles to our 7 calls to action. So for example, what does equity actually look like in practice? Well, our first overarching call to action is to ensure integrated, participatory, rights-based approaches to governance and policymaking at all levels in order to address the structural inequities and power imbalances in food systems. So what this means as practice is that our food systems will be built on democratic principles, transparent deliberation, shared power, and inclusive participation to ensure that policies are driven not only by evidence, but also by ethics and the broader public interest. Another example is, what does resilience look like, for instance? This is connected to our 6th call to action, which is to create enabling environments for agroecological and regenerative approaches. Our future of food supports the advancement of ecological and regenerative systems and a greater role for smallholder farmers, Indigenous people, and women. There's more I could say in terms of the calls to action. Just one more really quick piece. We've done a lot of work on the economics of food systems, and together with the European Commission and UN Environment, we developed what is, I think, probably the most holistic, comprehensive evaluation framework for food systems. It's called TEEB Agri-Food, and we can send a link afterwards if people are interested. But essentially that helps us see what the impacts of the food system are, both on the negative side and on the positive side. And so ultimately, the vision for the future of food is where we really decrease any of the negative impacts that food systems are having, and we increase any of the positive impacts we can find in developing robust, resilient, equitable, sustainable food systems.
It's so helpful and I think powerful how you've drawn this line between the principles and the call to actions, and it really brings it to life, how we can go from this philosophical inspiration to something concrete, fundable for philanthropy here. And so it just is really inspiring. Julie, let's hear from you. What is the future that FAR is fighting for?
Well, the future is very similar in perspective to what Ruth talked about. It's accessible, it's precise, and I'll explain that a little more in a minute. It's nutrient rich, it's green, and it's thriving. And, I like Ruth's description of let's negate all the things that are not constructive in the food system, and let's find better ways and better approaches to dealing with them. In terms of precision, I'd like to expound on that a little bit. Farmers are now able to ride through their fields in tractors with multiple screens in front of them, and those screens can show what the rate of seeding should be in a particular part of their farm because it's a certain slope and it's a certain soil quality. They can determine how to precisely apply fertilizer or weed killer in certain areas for similar reasons. It can apply a different type of seed in areas that might be more shady or get a lot of water. And so this idea of precision, not only in agriculture, where data and technology is much more important, applies. It also applies to people's diets, and these diets need to get more precise in order to be able to treat food as medicine, for example. And we may even go to the doctor one day and have the doctor say, here's the diet you need to follow, this is my prescription for you. So I think there are multiple dimensions that need to move forward, and we're excited to be right in the thick of these things.
Fabulous. Now I'm seeing that we're coming up. We've got about 10 minutes before the Q&A from the audience. So we'll go quickly through those next couple, and I think it'll be really exciting for the audience listening. So let's talk solutions. Turning to food system solutions, what are some of the most innovative things that you're seeing in terms of opportunities for food systems transformation that you're funding or you're pointing prospective funders towards? Ruth?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. And first of all, just to underscore that the Global Alliance itself is not a funding body, but of course our members are, so I'm going to draw from them. Secondly, I really appreciate your focus on innovation. I just want to make sure that the transformative element is in there as well. And I often hear, especially in recent conversations, about what defines kind of innovative sort of solutions or transformative solutions. And I hear a lot about scalability and transferability and actionability. And I just want to underscore that we also need to make sure that the criteria for analyzing solutions also includes things like those deep, deep values and principles like equity and inclusion and resilience. So with that in hand, I pulled up 3 quick examples from our membership where we are seeing some really, really interesting things. So first of all, in terms of shifting production, our member Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiatives in India, in partnership with the government of Andhra Pradesh, is supporting what's called community-based natural farming. It aims to replenish soil health by avoiding chemical fertilizers and pesticides, counter the effects of climate change, increase food and nutrition security, productivity, improved water and air quality and human health, aligning with the global push for regenerative farming. It's a really impressive initiative that is spreading across the state as well as across the country, and it's now actually even being considered in other jurisdictions like Kenya and Mexico, given its promise to change the future of food by amplifying all these different positive impacts. So that's one example of something super exciting. Second example is shifting healthcare. So our member, the J.W. McConnell Foundation in Canada, has been supporting an initiative called Nourish Health that's supporting the healthcare sector to leverage the power of food to transform health impacts. So through this program, they are creating healthcare food hubs, they're advancing sustainable purchasing, they're promoting what they call planetary health menus, they're improving the patient and staff food experience, all within the context of building health leadership and understanding food as medicine. So again, a really impressive initiative working to realize the potential of the health sector for positive change. A third example, and finally, is the Christensen Fund based in California. They support partners to develop holistic visions of well-being. And Indigenous groups such as the Melanesian Spearhead Group and the Vanuatu Cultural Center have developed holistic visions that seek balance, reciprocity, and moreover, an integrated system that supports human, animal, community, economic, and ecological health. One of Christensen's partners, Vanuatu Indigenous Land Defense Desk, used their vision to inform the development of the indicators of well-being, which now is measured by the Vanuatu National Statistics Office and has been adopted throughout the region. So again, just really interesting things that for me point to the fact that, that transformation is happening, and we can kind of taste and smell the potential of, building these out and supporting other similar kinds of initiatives.
Beautiful examples. Those are great. Julie, what comes to mind for you? Some of the most innovative solutions, and recognizing, I think Ruth's really important point that the criteria we put on solutions that are amenable to food systems transformation are multiple and need to contend with some of these deeper principles issues.
Yeah, and I think one of our projects that best embodies that is what we call our Egg Tech Prize, where we are incentivizing entrepreneurs to identify the sex of a chicken egg prior to it hatching. Right now it's done after the egg is hatched, and the males are separated from the females, and 9 billion males are culled every year and sent to a different supply chain than as our food. So the goal is to eliminate the, I believe it's 14-day period from the point at which a egg is ready to hatch to when the egg actually hatches and people can visually identify the sex. And so this is both an animal welfare issue, but it's also a resource issue in that if you don't have to incubate those eggs for 14 days, then you're able to cut down the inputs into the system in a really innovative way. There's also a unique project that we're working on with the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's called the Periodic Table of Foods. And we're working on a consortium, as you know, to identify how the relationships between food, diet, health, and the environment, so that we better understand beyond the nutrition profile that's on a box in a much deeper way and more fulsome way, how various nutrients are understood going forward. So it's understanding the dark matter of food, which is exciting. And then there's the application of artificial intelligence and predictive analytics, which is exciting, and it can help determine where outbreaks of pests or pathogens are likely to occur so that we can interrupt those vectors before and mitigate a situation before it becomes very widespread. And we've seen this with COVID on a human scale, but it also happens obviously on an animal scale. So using the big data approach, really using those tools to move the innovation forward in the food and ag space.
Thanks so much, Julie. And I'm so glad you mentioned the periodic table of food in collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation. We do consider this one of our more innovative and really exciting breakthrough investment areas. We just pick up a piece of kale. No one can tell you actually what the biochemical structure is of that vegetable. And so imagine to have a library, a database of the comprehensive, full biochemical makeup of the top 1,000 foods that mankind consumes. So this is a really exciting initiative. I'm going to jump to our last question, and then we'll open the floor. I see we have a couple questions already coming in, but I'd like to make this one a real systems-focused question. So we are seeing this shift, and I think because of the UN Food Systems Summit this year, the shift is happening with even greater velocity, and that's a shift from focusing on piecemeal solutions for food and agriculture to food systems approaches. So what advice can you both offer to fellow philanthropists that are really taking a role in trying to embrace the systems approach to food systems transformation? And Ruth, I was always putting you in the hot seat. So Julie, why don't you take this one first? And I'll give Ruth a break and then come back to her.
Yeah, we like to think of food systems outside of the traditional food systems box. So if you think about soil health to human health, for example, you think about expanding our perspective on the nutritional value of food. We're thinking about the new products, new grains that can hit the market by involving everyone from the farmer to the consumer packaged goods industry to see if we can find the new quinoa that is healthier, for example, than corn and wheat. So my advice to those investing in philanthropy is that you need to involve multiple partners, you need to involve multiple sectors. Given the complexity of food and the food systems, these perspectives are required in order to have an effective project that will actually go through tech transfer to the ground. And so science knows no boundaries, and the big advantage of food and agriculture science is it can typically be applied immediately without a whole lot of regulation involved. So it's harnessing this scientific aspect of things and really turning it to transformation in line with the principles that Ruth laid out, for example.
Very good. I really appreciate that notion of inclusion as a risk mitigation measure when operating in complexity. I completely agree. Ruth, what about your take?
Yeah, so I have three things that I would recommend. First of all is to read and educate oneself. I'm a complete systems junkie, and there are amazing resources out there on systems approaches, and I would direct everyone to Danella Meadows, and there are many others as well. But one of Danella Meadows' papers is called Dancing with Systems. And to dance with a system, you have to feel the beat. You have to get to understand the system. You have to know how it functions and where it might be open to change. So I think there are lots of gems just in terms of understanding how to work within sort of complexity dynamics and in a systems framing. Number one, read and find out more. The second thing I would recommend is to really utilize effective frameworks. So our principles, for instance, are one framework. We use those every day. We also use the Team Agri-Food framework that I mentioned, and again, happy to send more information on that. We also have something called Blue Marble Evaluation on the monitoring and evaluation side, which is a global systems evaluation framework. And I'm very happy to announce that it's just been accepted as part of the UN Food Systems Summit synthesis and analysis that will be happening around the independent dialogues as a way to understand, cross-cutting themes and threads and issues. So utilize effective frameworks. They can really help in understanding the system. And then the third one, and this builds on something Julie just said, but it's really to work in collaboration with others. Systems are inherently about interactions and relationships. So you really can't take a systems approach by yourself. So connect with peers that you know that are working in this area. Be open to alliances with other funders where your impact can be enhanced and more effective. And essentially work in relationship with others as we learn to see the system in new ways and understand how we can redirect it in a better direction.
I love that synthesis, Ruth. Read, dance, frame, collaborate. As a fellow systems junkie, and I'm going to heretofore refer to myself as that, I published a piece with two other systems scholars in the Stanford Social Innovation Review last month called the Thou Shalt Nots of Systems Change. And I'll throw the link if anyone cares to check it out in the thread. But what it came from, we had a small communion with fellow funders. It was all philanthropists talking really frankly about what keeps us from embracing a systems approach. And so the piece organizes the barriers to philanthropy, to taking systems approaches into four buckets. We have problems with our processes. We have challenges with our cognition and our attitudes. We have issues around values that are sometimes hard for us to confront. And then there are challenges pertinent to roles and success criteria for what we deem success when making an investment. So, the kinds of processes, we so often rely on very simple quantitative metrics for reporting that totally camouflage the messiness, the non-linearity of systems change. On the cognition and attitudes, where often we have this bias towards action and almost an obsession with speed that can undermine a system's mindset. And really, simplification of reality can sometimes come at the detriment of possibility when it comes to systems change strategy. On the values front, like the ethical justification for changing systems, such as who decides on the direction and the contours of changing a food system being pursued, those are too infrequently explored. And on the roles and success criteria, we often need to engage external systems actors as either catalysts or supporters of systems change, but they mustn't be drivers or even the dominant voices that supplant the actors living in systems. So to Ruth's fourth point about collaborate or perish, really. So I think lots of hard-earned insights there from your fellow philanthropists, but I'm seeing the questions are pouring in. So let's take a look at these and see if we can hop into them here. let's see, I see one here around Ruth. Let's see, really great principles from Future of Food, and great to see the refresh from the Rockefeller Foundation too. Given that food systems also employ the most number of people, how do we ensure that livelihoods and decent work, agency, dignity of labor remain a central feature of the food systems we report? Any thoughts on that from Ruth, Julie, myself?
Well, I'm happy to jump in here. I mean, I think it's implicit in a number of the principles that we have, from equity to inclusion. Many of those principles are encompassing of a whole bunch of different considerations. One thing I would say is that in all of our research that we've done, this issue has become central. Obviously, it's a theme that just surfaces over and over and over again. Whether it's our SEEDS report, whether it's our Food Health Nexus report that looks at, food system workers, really it's shining a light on those at, what some people call the sharp end of food systems, and especially the sharp end of climate impacts or hunger impacts or COVID impacts. And that is women, smallholder farmers, and Indigenous peoples. And so much of our work has really been trying to understand, what those dynamics are and how those supports can be put in place. In terms of how we actually do that, that's where some of our calls to action come in. So for example, one of our calls to action is around public finance. Public finance is a huge lever in terms of redirecting funds to support those at the sharp end. So that's one possible solution. The other one is looking at other financial flows. Public finance is one thing, but you also have financial flows from the World Bank, from the Global Environment Facility, from philanthropists, from investors. How do we ensure that those financial flows are going in the right way? And I think one of the ways we can do that is by using these frameworks that I mentioned to ensure that, as for instance, as foundations invest their endowments, are they taking into consideration equity considerations when they're deciding who to invest in and where to put those funds? So there are many different practical ways to do that, and happy to share our calls to action and talk more about this, but just a couple ideas off the bat.
Beautiful. Julie, any thoughts from you on this one?
No, I think Ruth covered it very beautifully, and given that that equity fundamental principle is in your four, it's important to us too, but a little bit further removed. Science is inherently equitable, we'd like to think. And so one of our goals is to ensure that minority serving institutions, for example, get as many opportunities to work on exciting science as other types of organizations, land grant universities, for example. So we do have some special initiatives in that area, and we're excited about seeing those come to fruition soon.
Well, maybe building on that, Julie, I see one that seems perfectly positioned for you, coming in from Carolyn Williams. She says, based on your work and what you've heard from partners, where should scientific research focus to support these visions for positive change? So, those that manifest the kind of aspiration that all three of us really spoke to.
Yeah, I think the scientific research needs to focus on many of the principles that Ruth laid out and you laid out, but I think that approaching them in a way that straddles the concerns of the farmers. And I saw one question in here about how some groups are not aligned potentially with the values of the other groups, and so it's hard to get that alignment throughout the system. And I think that it takes a lot of work to figure out, and in our Ag Mission initiative, we're doing some of that change management work to see what will motivate farmers to sequester carbon in their soil, for example, so that there will be a financial incentive. But what if, for example, with enteric methane, you're not able to have a financial incentive associated with feeding your cows red seaweed, for example, to reduce the methane production. So I think there's a lot of those questions that have extremely elegant answers to them, such as the soil carbon sequestration question on a for-profit basis that can provide another income stream to farmers, and there's others that we've yet to figure out elegant solutions for, and so those are tougher areas to address.
Sarah, can I just jump in here?
Please, totally, yes.
Yeah, just because it's one of the things that the Global Alliance has been really trying to advocate for over the last little while, which is that, you know, scientific evidence is absolutely critical. Science is good. It can really, you know, help lead the way and provide information. But one of the things that we've noticed and that we've heard from many of our partners is that we often focus on scientific evidence at the expense of other diverse forms of knowledge. And so one of the things we really advocate for is broadening that out to ensure that we're actually also looking at things like Indigenous knowledge or farmer knowledge or community knowledge. And I think this is really paramount, especially as we head into some of these global processes, where we tend to even focus more on sort of the hard scientific side as opposed to the social sciences side. So anyway, just really wanting to expand this question around science and scientific evidence to be sure that we're being inclusive in that way as well.
Yeah, this is a huge debate, and as you know better than anyone, Ruth, so at the center of the UN Food Systems Summit, and how do we arbitrate and contend with these differing perspectives when it comes to alternative views on what the future of food looks like, which I think takes us to this really nice question from an anonymous attendee about how we highlighted a lot of common ground as panelists, but some of our stakeholders and grantees just have very different views on food systems change. Can we take the risk of naming areas where there is conflict in food system visions and whether those must be resolved for progress? And I'm happy to hop in with four tension points. The same data report I mentioned from the Food System Vision Prize, and I'll pop the link in, analyzed and sifted and distilled 4 key tensions. So one of them was, do we optimize for food system efficiency or food quality? Definitely 2 different views there. Do we optimize our economic systems to support farming livelihoods, affordability for consumers, or the true cost of food, which accounts for human health or environmental impacts? That can feel like a tension. In the future, can food systems within urban and rural areas both flourish, or do we have to choose? And a fourth, do we need to reimagine animal agriculture or eliminate it altogether? Curious, Ruth and Julie, other tensions in areas of just where we're not seeing convergence that you're bumping into in your work?
Yeah, I'll take that to start at least. I think food waste is quite an interesting area in that the tension there is that you have food which is not very expensive to the consumer, some consumers, and maybe most consumers, at least here in the US, and therefore it is frequently wasted. And I think that is a tension that the system perhaps could build more redundancy into it and charge more for food and make it more precious to people. So I think that there's definitely a balance there to be struck. We're doing a measuring consumer food waste initiative here shortly, with a retail partner that is going to be looking at that and gathering all the data on that to see where those decision points lie from the consumer perspective, so that we can then take the next step of determining what some mitigation factors may be. But I think that's a tension that is a challenge. And then, of course, there's the accessibility piece. If you raise the prices, is it going to be accessible to everyone? So lots of dynamics in that dimension.
Ruth, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. I think there are, a number of big issues that we as a global community are contending with, such as the future of meat, protein. I think there's still big controversies around genetic modification. I think there are big controversies around data and who owns data, who has control of data. The list could go on and on. I think it's really interesting, your list, because actually I would respectfully push back on that list to say, you know, if we're starting to identify these tensions and trade-offs, is it quality or is it efficiency? We're not going to get anywhere. It's both. We cannot be putting things in these binary terms. That is not a system. Our lungs cannot succeed if our heart fails. Africa cannot succeed if Europe fails. Europe cannot succeed if Africa fails. It's a system, and we have to get out of that mentality and really hold the power of uplifting all of these things where we find multiple benefits and where these things aren't trade-offs, where we're saying, do we want to be efficient or do we want quality? We really have to sort of see, again, back to the principles, how we drive towards food systems that, you know, are diverse, that are equitable, that are inclusive all at the same time. And I believe we can, because we have the examples that show us the way to the future where all of those things are being delivered by our food systems.
I think that is the inspiring note to end on. What feel like tensions, what feel like trade-offs, and the list I gave is the, you know, straight from the data of how people are portraying at least these 1,300 teams, which isn't to say that what you just spoke to isn't what we all need to elevate toward. How can we reframe? What do we need in terms of the mindsets, the skill sets, and the tool sets to see these things not as zero-sum games, but as a whole new way of operating? So let us move in that spirit. Let us move in that direction. I just want to say thank you so much to Ruth and Julie, both really offering inspirational and thoughtful and provoking comments, which is just what we needed in this panel, and to Claire and the Global Philanthropy Forum for inviting us to spend time with you today. Please be in touch with any of us if you have further questions or wish to continue the conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.